online. I'm going to call to order the Planning Board meeting of March 7th, 2023. After this meeting concludes, then we will call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting. I would like to call for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Gallant, and I heard Councillor Adams as a second. As we begin all of our meetings, I'd like to take a moment to say that I'm drawing a blank, so I didn't write it down here today. That we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq First Nation. Land reconciliation is a small, land recognition is a small but important part of the process of reconciliation with all First Nations peoples across this country and across this island, and that we are all treaty people. We'll call on any councillor with a conflict of interest to declare it now with respect to the single item before Planning Board. Hearing none, I will at this point pass the meeting over to Chair of Planning Board, Councillor Doiron.
Thank you, Your Worship. And actually, I'll draw attention to the new flags behind you. We have new flags. Since we're on the topic of reconciliation, and I noticed when we came in today that there was a couple of new flags up, so very nice. So our planning board meeting for this evening, I will just get into it. It's for 86 Cedar Street, and it is a major variance and also for a parking variance. The supporting explanation: the purpose of the variances is to allow an apartment building where the main building lot area and floor area ratio, development standards, and the parking requirements do not meet the zoning bylaw. So there is a site plan on the screen, and if you draw your attention to the upper left corner, I believe the minimum as per the bylaw is 4 meters from the edge of your building to your property line. Is that correct to say that? So if you look at the top left, the building comes to 3.84 meters, and at the very bottom, 3.39 meters in the side yards. So just a very small variance required, but we'll get into the application. The background: the city received a site plan approval application from the Boys and Girls Club of Summerside for a 10-unit apartment building for transitional housing. Upon review, staff determined the following variances to the main building, development standards, and parking requirements are required. For lot coverage, a variance, 12%, would be required to allow the proposed lot coverage at the building footprint area of 414 square meters, or 4,456 square feet, where 369 square meters, or 3,972 square feet, is allowed. For the floor area ratio, a variance 47% would be required to allow the proposed total floor area, all floors, of 1,242 square meters, or 13,369 square feet, where 842 square meters, 9,064 square feet, is allowed. The side yard setback, a variance 16% would be required to allow the side yard setback on the south side of 3.39 meters, where 4 meters is required. The variance applies to an 8-meter section of the proposed building. So you can see on the layout there that there's just a small section of the building that sticks out a little further than the rest, and that brings it to a little under 4 meters. Parking, voluntary option for reduced parking. The parking requirement for a 10-unit apartment building is 1 space per unit. The applicant is proposing 0 on-site parking spaces and 1 off-site parking space to be located at 106 Cedar Street, which is the Boys and Girls Club parking area. Main building, the height, lot coverage, floor area ratio, or yard depth, and development standard, the setbacks, are subject to the justification under Section 7.2 of the zoning bylaw to process major variances more than 10%, subject to council approval. For main building and development standards, the development officer shall provide written notice to all assessed property owners within a radius of 30 meters from the subject lot, describing the variance sought and inviting written comments within 7 clear days. The application is reviewed by the planning board. The planning board makes a recommendation to council, and council may approve, deny, or approve a variance less than requested. 18 letters were mailed to 16 property owners with a written comment submission deadline of February 16th, 2023. No written comments were received. The co-property owner at 80 Cedar Street, Jordan Bigelow, called the development officer seeking more information about the variances. The development officer emailed a copy of the site plan to Mr. Bigelow for his consideration. The report under Section 7.2 of the zoning bylaw, variance applications shall be considered by council, planning board, or the development officer as applicable against the following tests for justifying a variance. All applicable criteria must be met. A, that the hardship is due to unique physical conditions of the lot or property, including small lot size, irregular lot shape, existing building location on the property, or exceptional topographical conditions, which make it impractical to develop in strict conformity with bylaw standards. Exceptional topographical conditions may include, but are not limited to, trees, slope of the land, etc. The staff comment, yes, these variance requests would meet this test. The existing lot is an irregular shape, making it difficult to develop in strict compliance. B, that the proposed variance meets the general intent of the official plan. Staff comment, yes, this variance request would meet this test. The variance meets the intent of the official plan. C, that the proposed variance meets the general intent of the zone. Staff comment, yes, this variance request would meet this test. An apartment building is an allowable use in the R4 zone. And D, that the proposed variances would not impact negatively on adjacent properties or on the essential character of the surrounding neighborhood, including taking into consideration any comments from neighbors. Staff comment, yes, these variance requests would meet this test. 20 letters were mailed to 11 properties within 30 meters of the boundaries of the subject property. Comments from adjacent property owners were due on or before February 16th, 2023. No verbal or written comments were received from the notified property owners. Parking variances are subject to Section 10.6 of the zoning bylaw. To process a parking variance, the applicant may apply under the voluntary option by written submission to council for less spaces than what is normally required. The applicant shall present justifications for reducing parking, such as referencing corporate practices, actual needs, or comparisons to similar uses. The application is reviewed by the planning board. The planning board makes a recommendation to council, and council may allow all, some, or none of the applicant's requested reduction. The applicant has submitted the following justifications for the variance. The proposed 10-unit apartment building will serve as transitional housing. Transitional housing is not a market-based apartment building. The tenant life circumstances and nature of occupancy is not a direct comparison. As well, the location is central to availability of services, schools, and Summerside Boys and Girls Club services, so the need for transportation is greatly reduced. As a comprehensive service provider, Summerside Boys and Girls Club is positioned to provide transportation when helpful to tenants. Based on the experience of current operations of Lifehouse located on Cedar Street, as well as the nature of the anticipated tenants and occupancy as a transitional housing, Summerside Boys and Girls Club is not anticipating that tenants will arrive with one vehicle per unit. Accordingly, we are requesting a variance to reduce the on-site parking to 0 and permit one dedicated parking space. The location will be at Summerside Boys and Girls Club's parking lot located at 106 Cedar Street. Staff review, the side yard on the south setback variance of 16% only applies to a portion of the building wall, 8 meters of that, not the entire building wall. The R4 standards allow the main building to cover 35% of the lot area. The floor area ratio, total floor area of all floors, allowed is 80% of the lot area. The lot coverage and floor area ratio percentages are set to accommodate on-site parking requirements. Being as the applicant is requesting a parking variance, no on-site parking, the lot coverage variance of 12% and the floor area ratio variance of 47% can be accommodated. Staff support the variances from Summerside Boys and Girls Club for the variances, subject to council's approval of the parking variance. As per section 7.3 of the zoning bylaw, the planning board shall make a recommendation to council on this application before it is approved or denied. The planning board recommendation, whether carried or defeated, will be brought forward for council for a final decision. The planning board recommendation, the application received from Summerside Boys and Girls Club to allow a lot coverage variance 12%, a floor area ratio variance 47%, side yard south setback variance 16%, and a parking variance of 0 on-site parking spaces and 1 off-site parking space at 106 Cedar Street to be recommended to be approved by council. And I guess before we vote, before the planning board members vote to move this to council, guess I'll ask if there's any questions or comments from staff, or if the applicant wishes to speak or anything, we'll allow any or all of that now.
Mr. Chair.
No, you go ahead.
I may have missed it, Mr. Chair. On the letters that were sent, were there any responses back? I know that one gentleman did, but were there any other responses from the neighborhood?
No verbal or written comments were received from the notified property owners, other than that one person that had a clarification that he wanted, it was made. And actually, one thing that I did notice when I was reading through, at first it said 18 letters were mailed to 16, and then it said 20 letters were mailed to 11. Is that just?
Just a typo.
That is a typo. Okay, so was it? 18 letters were mailed to 16 property owners. Okay. Councillor MacDougall.
Hi, Aaron and Linda. I just had a question around the parking. All the other variances is, staff is good with that. I'm not for or against anything right now, but I need to know, how does this affect anybody else that comes along that wants a 0 parking? For, if we have another developer coming in, how do we justify what we're doing?
Basically, we have those justifications to consider, and we would do that for any development that came in. So they have outlined the reasons that they
Yes.
don't feel
Yeah.
like they require it. So if it was a market, like if it was a market value situation, we'd obviously require those spaces.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we're covered. Thanks.
Okay. Adam, did anybody want to speak to anything, or we're just going to keep chugging on? Okay. I don't think there's any questions. I think it was pretty straightforward, I guess. And if anybody here from the public wants to ask anything, we'll be happy to allow that at this time. If not, we will, I guess we'll just move on to I'll read the recommendation once more, and then planning board can vote to bring it to council. And that council meeting, I guess, would be just the regular March monthly meeting, which is the 3rd Monday in March. I'm sure somebody is looking at their calendar as I read this recommendation into the minutes. 20th, March 20th, okay, at 6:30. The application received from Summerside Boys and Girls Club to allow a lot coverage variance, a floor area ratio variance, side yard variance, and a parking variance of 0 on-site parking spaces and 1 off-site parking space at 106 Cedar Street to be recommended to be approved by council. So I will, I guess, move that recommendation and ask for a second from planning board. Councillor Snow? That leaves the mayor. Unless you're a nay, you're in favor, okay. Okay, so that's passed, and we will discuss it March 20th as a full council. And that is all for the planning board, your worship.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just call for a motion to adjourn the planning board meeting. Councillor Gallant, and second. Councillor Doiron. And we will carry that. That meeting is now officially over. Thanks, guys. Is everyone okay just to continue here? I think Councillor McColman, we're going to move things along for you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Told you I wouldn't say anything about your special day. So I will call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order for March 7th, 2023 for the Committee of the Whole of the Summerside City Council. Before we take an approval of the agenda, I am going to amend the agenda briefly. Two things to add. One, we'll add as HIJ. It will be J. Item J will be a community fridge update. I noticed Councillor Adams mentioned in the previous minutes that there was going to be an update. We'd requested an update for tonight's meeting. And that got missed, so we'll put that on the agenda. And the second, I'm just going to add under, I will call, I guess, B2, just to make a note with respect to Councillor Ramsey's leave as a result of the election. And just a brief update on that. So with those two amendments, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented with the amendments? Councillor MacDougall, Councillor McColman, anyone opposed to the agenda as presented? Hearing none, we will carry it forward. Moving on to item B, conflict of interest declaration for any councillor with respect to any of the items on tonight's agenda. Hearing none, there are no conflicts, real or perceived. Moving on to item B2, which is Councillor Ramsey's leave. I just thought I should mention this as well. We talked about this at our last meeting. Councillor Ramsey is the nominated candidate for District 22. Is that right? Did I get the district number right? Yeah. Always get 21 and 2 mixed up in the provincial election. That election was called today. So as per the Municipal Government Act, as per the Municipal Government Act, Councillor Ramsey is automatically on leave from council. And then we review if Councillor Ramsey is successful and becomes an MLA. As I understand, the Municipal Government Act requires that is an immediate resignation, and then the city will hold a by-election within the period of 6 months. For the operational purposes of the next month, I will just assume the representative responsibilities for police and fire. I will certainly not be doing that long term. We will come back to that in April at our April 4th meeting. And with respect to planning board, we still have 3 members of planning board, so we'll continue to hold a quorum there. So I don't think there's any need to make any adjustments. Everyone okay with that? Great. Okay, we'll move right along to item C, which is coming from Councillor Doiron with respect to off-site signage.
Okay, thank you again, Your Worship, and apologies to Deputy Mayor Snow, who I mistakenly referred to as Councillor Snow when we did the vote. So the eyes were burning a hole in my head. Off-site signage, I will note that as somebody that works in the signage industry, this really wasn't anything that was brought up to me in that capacity. So, and I guess even if it was, there's really no conflict here because it has nothing to do with, interest of anything. It's just somebody was interested, I guess, or somebody is interested, more than one party, in putting an off-site sign on their property. And I guess before we start, I'll just quickly clarify what an off-site sign is, and that is a sign that isn't on the property of the business owner. Is that generally what that means? Like it's on another property, or it's on their property, but it's advertising other businesses that aren't on that property. So examples would be all of our electronic signage across the city that you can buy advertising space on, and none of those businesses own the land that the sign is on. So that's, I guess, what is referred to as off-site signage. So we are at our quota, I guess, which is 4 or 5? 4. And with the city expanding and more people, wanting to move over to these electronic type signage displays, the appetite is there, I guess, to have a chat about possibly putting that up from 4 to another number, and that's why I think that's why we have staff here, because I think it's important to hear your input and whether or not that could be a good thing or why that might not necessarily be a good thing. I know there was talk over the last number of years about the city, we don't want to look like the Vegas Strip or anything like that with electronic signs everywhere. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. If we would like to maybe hand it over to Linda and Aaron to ask you both if there's pros, cons, and whether or not it's something that you would support or caution or a little bit of both.
I can speak in generalities, and Linda can get into the details if she deals with it day to day, but we do allow and have changed to allow people to modernize and go to electronic signage, so it wasn't so much that people can't shift their signage and update their signage to electronic. It was discussed about, again, just providing their own signage for their own business on that property and not advertising 3 or 4 other businesses that are on there. There's a number of rules that go with it as well, like how long the signage, if it's electronic, how long it's up there, and before you can shift to the next slide so that you're not being a distraction to the drivers. So there's really not a lot of opportunity for multiple. If you're putting up your own signage, you're advertising your own business, there's something like every 7 seconds that has to stay there. So if you're driving, you're not actually seeing the next sign or very many if it's on your own. Although some people have made it a business to operate strictly an off-site sign, strictly for other off-site businesses or for a revenue stream. We did have it in our policy, and when the first one came through to do this, we created a policy and had a number of criteria and where they could be located and so far away from each other and not in residential zones, because we did have some challenges even with the ones that were, I'll say, legal. And when they first popped up, if they were close to somebody residential, we were getting complaints and inquiries from people about how bright the signage was, and then when it was fine, it was one thing, but when it flipped to another sign in their house, all of a sudden they'd just be getting these, I'll say, flashes of a new sign. So there's some challenges when we first started. We also then coexisted with that for a while, and then I think it was probably last year, I guess with COVID, the years have run together. A couple of years ago, we had another inquiry for another sign that didn't meet our criteria. We went back and brought it before the council of the day and said, we're allowed 4, this would be the 4th one, but it wasn't meeting one of the criteria. So we again decided to not just look at that criteria, we did a review of all the rules and regulations that go along with them, and we decided as council to stick with the rules that we had. We did change the one that allowed them to be within 1 kilometer of each other, because in this case one was on Granville Street and the other was on Central Street. Although they were totally separate, they were within 1 kilometer, but technically you weren't. So we changed the wording to allow that 4th sign, and at that time we reviewed this would be our 4th, and council of the day deemed that was enough, because the intent was to try and find major entryways into the city, have 1 in each entryway, and that's really where we were targeting to allow them to happen. And as we don't control what's on Route 1A and Route 2, we basically picked Water Street East and one down in Water Street, and Granville Street and Central Street was kind of the main entry points. We also at that time, I think, I don't have a copy of it, but I know we went back and said where else could we fit them and not be within residential areas and so far away. There wasn't a lot of other sites possible to put them and then meet those other existing criteria. So it has been reviewed, and we had one again recently, probably last year. They were inquiring about it, but I don't understand. Again, they're currently referring to what was being done in their province in Alberta, and it was almost like a wall sign. It was humongous. It was larger than the one I think out at Reed's Corner. They were going to stick that on a building here. So our size again is, I think, 6 by 8 or something, not 6 by 9, 55. That was the rough signage size. So that was reviewed with a few saying, okay, we do have one ourselves that came about through another before we even started this, and it's kind of like, I'll say, non-conforming to our standard. It's the first one that went in out on the highway, and you can see how big that one is. So we have comparisons to say, look, that's probably too big to be downtown and in amongst the things. We have the one in Granville Street, we'll say by Roy Boats, that meets the size, and we've kind of went through the test of a few of them saying, here's where they are and here's the reviews that have happened. And we've had a couple instances where people have asked for them, and we have gone through a review with the last council in the last couple of years. And we did make one minor tweak in that regulations. And I don't know, you want to add anything, Linda, you feel free, but that's the quick recap.
Yeah, I think just as Aaron mentioned, one of the things that we did do with the other criteria that are outlined here, where they can be located not within site triangles and some of the distances from residential uses. When we explored that, it really limits where they can be allowed anyway. So that really shrunk the amount. And like I say, at the time, council was, so for example, if we use Bayview Drive as an example as another gateway into our city, there's so many residences around there that we wouldn't feel that would be a suitable place. So unless you want to allow additional ones in commercial areas, again, we'd have to look into it a little bit, but we still wouldn't recommend the Reed's Corner sign. That actually started out as a type of a welcome to Summerside sign, and it morphed into something different, and but it wouldn't meet our current standards. It's a big sign, you know, and it's hard to appreciate the size of that sign when it's so open out there. But if you took that sign and put it on Water Street East, that's going to be a substantial size sign. So, so as far as the size, we wouldn't recommend going any larger than what it is. But again, we could revisit this specific site to see if there's other criteria. With this last sign that was proposed, it definitely exceeded the size of the sign that we would allow, and there were some issues with where they had it sited versus we have some power lines in the way and things that might impact something there as well. But we would have to look at the distance from, it shouldn't be, I don't think it's an issue. The 4 signs that we have now are Reed's Corner, the former Bag Company building, and then the one at the corner of Walker and Central, and one at the corner of Granville and Roy Boats.
Okay, so I guess hypothetically, if we were to leave all of the criteria requirements as is and simply looked at increasing the maximum number, is that maybe a realistic way to go, or should it be kept status quo and just revisited as applications come in? Or I mean, is there any risk or negative result in putting that maximum 4 up to 6 or 5 or 8?
I guess that's going to be your guys' call. We're trying to just provide you to say the intent was allow people to modernize their signage and not stay and be electronic and have their own message, be able to interchange on their own property. And then it just turned into, are we really trying to make that a driver? Like people are putting it in as a the 3 instances we have besides their own is that we had it there is really just a business sticking up a sign, not even advertising their own. It's just a standalone advertising. So how much of that do you want in your city is a decision you guys are going to have to make.
So like the Quality Inns and places like that just run their own messaging, that's okay.
Correct.
Regardless.
And all the other businesses could still update their
Yeah.
signage to do that and not be limited. They just can't advertise the other people across the street or down the road or something else. And
Okay.
on they're allowed to update their own signage to a certain size and everything, but just not be advertising businesses that they don't operate on that property.
Right. Yeah, okay. And I mean, and the one person that I was speaking to, they referenced, allowing the advertising for nonprofits. And I know the bylaw doesn't care whether it's nonprofit or whether it's a company, but that was one of the, so I guess, I don't know, maybe I'll leave it up to if anybody has any input on it, or we can table it. I'm not really getting lobbied on it either way. It was a couple of folks that were interested, a few months apart, I guess, actually, and I said I'd bring it up and we'll talk, and here we are. So if anybody has anything, I'd be happy to just chat it out. And maybe status quo is the way to go. I'm supportive of whatever council wants to do, so.
Rick. So, just so I understand, so the off-site is the only ones that are being limited or, yeah, not personal or business or,
And that's the same as if you owned a snow blowing company and you want to put little signs on stakes on some other property. It's not just the electronic, like the off-site is, you know, a third party, not on the property kind of thing.
Councillor Morrison, the intent, I guess, at the time was to update that signage bylaw. It was to make it current to allow modern signage to happen. And then when that happened, it was interchangeable, which triggered one person saying, I like to put a sign up and start a business of just advertising other people's stuff. And that's how those regulations started. But it was intent first to update that signage bylaw to make it more modern and allow people to have electronic signage, but just not have them beyond what the individual people wanted for their own business. What then that came about as a proposal, council considered it of the day and said, okay, we'll try a few of them just to be main, a few of them in key points in the area and away from houses and primarily commercial areas, but it doesn't limit. You guys all had a business opening up and changing your signage from static signage to electronic, that you can modernize and change your content every day or every 7 seconds or whatever the rules are, you know.
and does the city of Summerside own any of those 4 signs that are off-site or part of?
I'll have to defer to Gordon and them because we're involved with the initial first one that went in. And then there was, when I say involved, I don't know, it was a group, Summerside group that was trying to promote. Really, I think it started out saying there's a lot of activity driving by Water Street East and we're trying to show what's going on in Summerside. So they were up there just trying to advertise. That's how it started out, to say, this event's happening in Summerside, come on in and look. You know, that was how it started. And then who was managing that content? And then it got turned over to third party, which turned it into displaying more content than that. But they can clarify.
We own it, and there's a third party that manages the content.
And that would be, that's the one at Reed's Corner?
And that's the only one?
We own, yes.
And I think for reference and size, Gordon, I think when that sign happened through a program, we got double-sided. The intent was to put it up there on both sides. Provincial regulations don't allow you to have signage on the opposite side of the road that you're traveling. Cars would be traveling towards Borden, looking at that sign and veering that way. They didn't allow us to put, so the second one is on the wall of the cup. That's how large it is. So when you see it on a building, that's how
So
big it is.
that's the other side of the sign is.
And that gives you reference of how big that sign is when you put it on a building.
Yeah, it looks bigger down there. I think.
Yeah, exactly. Just for reference there.
Okay, no, I was just curious on the 4 because I was having trouble understanding why we would want to, in some ways, you know, stop or impede people from having signage or, but if it's mostly just off-site, I mean, and a business can go and order one of those and then you get into the size thing and all that, which I understand that. That's, yeah, it makes good sense.
To say that down the road, the council of the day relooks at it and says, okay, the size is this. It's like getting TVs and all of a sudden that size is not common anymore. And maybe it's the next size is slightly different and you see a few and say, okay, that's okay, or a slight increase. You can review that at any time.
Yeah, and it's like, it's always when someone comes forward anyway, obviously the city tries to work with them as much as they can to make things fit.
And up until that 4th one went up in Walker last year, that's the first time it maxed out. It took us, I don't know, 5 or 10 years to max out to the 4 signs that we're just doing off-site stuff.
Yeah, I think it cost a little bit to get one, I think, so. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I guess, go
No,
ahead, Councillor MacDougall.
Rick had sort of had the same concerns I had, but I have no problem leaving it as it is, but if there's more demand comes in, I think we should, definitely have a look at it, so.
Would it make any, like, I know there's at least a couple that are looking at it. Would it be worthwhile putting it up so that it's in place for the next person, or should we wait? Like, I'm not interested in changing the size or any of the regulations on anything other than the quota.
What if the takeaway for staff was that the criteria remain the same, but if applications come in that meet all other criteria, that staff should evaluate them and bring that issue back to council?
Yeah, evaluate,
and
as
see-
opposed to just saying, no, sorry, we're full. I think that's the intention of, yeah. I don't think we necessarily need to say, okay, now there's 8, so maybe, Yeah, as long as it's not a strict denial, I guess, that's more or less, I guess, what I was hoping to get out of it, but yeah, if that's okay with everyone.
I would propose that staff would review any application
Yeah.
as normal, and if it met all other requirements and the proposed location was appropriate, if the only issue was that it would be number 5, then
Yeah,
we'd bring that forward to council for council to make a decision.
yeah,
Does that sound-
the only question would be the content on the signage itself at this point, because nothing else would change. Councillor McCollum?
I know the comment was made about the size on point number 5, but my question is on the, about the traffic areas at intersections where it could be a distraction. I think that's number 3. Could introduce visual distraction at busy intersections. So I'm thinking of some of the ones that have come in. What do we use as a litmus test or just in those kinds of situations that it could be in a very busy area and it could cause distraction when people are in traffic, when there's vehicles that are stopped or approaching stop signs at intersections? How would we?
We're just listing that as the pro and a con. It can happen now. It just can't happen to impede the sight line at the intersection. We did get some comments from some people when the 1 minute at Granville and Roy Boats that somebody's stopping them, not going through the light, they're reading the sign, so we have gotten them already, but there hasn't been very many either way, or we haven't had a high number of accidents that police are saying the cause of the accidents because of that sign, but if it is, they'll bring it forward. We'll have to, we're just listing that as a pro and con of actually having them. So the more you put out, but right now, we don't stop or refuse one because it's at a high volume intersection. We're just saying it's listing the pros and cons,
And just to clarify, again, this isn't about allowing more electronic signs. Because every business in Summerside tomorrow can go get an electronic sign. It's just changing the number of signage that you can advertise third parties on.
The content.
Not even necessarily electronic, it could be reader boards,
Right, yes.
anything.
Thank you.
I just had one other question, not regarding the electronic signs, but I see around the city, the sponsorship signs, like it could be, I seen one the other day and what made me think of it, and it was like a little area where they had grassed area, the flowers, and sponsored by,
Yes.
yeah. So how is that covered off in or is it? Signage bylaw. I just want to be fair, right?
Yeah,
So-
we'll have to go back. We didn't,
Yeah.
we're asked about content here. We didn't go
Yeah.
through the whole signage bylaw,
Yeah.
but it was just the content that we asked Councillor Doiron about.
Yeah.
Okay, we see it on there.
Yeah.
So we just did some, and again, I think some of them are like in the summertime where they have a flower bed. This one's done by so-and-so.
Yeah.
We'll have to look
Anyway.
at it, yeah.
And even at the ball field, when they're putting their sponsors on the outfield, like it's.
I do know, Bruce,
The ball field then, I guess, really is off the right of way. We're kind of just dealing with signage
Sure.
there. That's, but
Bruce, there are exceptions in the bylaw for city signage.
Okay, I will, I guess, personally leave it at that. I like, Gordon, I like your suggestion of just staff kind of reviewing it as they come in and not giving everybody a hard no, so that's comforting, I guess, to them. So I will leave it at that, and that's all I had, so, Your Worship, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Doiron. We will move on to item D, which is notification area. This is an issue brought up by Councillor Morrison.
So, one of the first calls I got when I joined council was that a couple of concerned people call about, I guess it would be considered rezoning a piece of property. And I believe when that happens, and the application gets put in or whatever, then the city delivers door to door within 60 meters, hand delivers a letter.
it's mail out, not hand delivered.
It is mailed out?
It's mailed out we just post them so that they're actually through Canada Post. We do hand delivers on construction projects. So whether anybody, if we're working on, or we're gonna be doing a sidewalk on a certain street for a while, we actually do hand deliver it, so there is some hand delivering that happens.
Okay.
But on the notification ones, the rezoning is 60 meters, and the one we just had tonight was a variance is 30 meters. And there's, if your property, it's computer generated to pick them, the outer limits of your property, and it's just offset from that, any property that fits within that 60-meter circle generates up, and the list comes from when we get them from Access PEI. We get our data updated every 2 weeks or a month. And if your property is in both names, you and your spouse, both of you get a letter, because one may be passed, or one may be for something against something, or who knows. So that's why sometimes you'll see so many properties and more letters than properties, because there's multiple names on it. So that's the process we have.
You're just covering all your bases.
We were told that through case examples of
Yeah,
where
and that's fine.
someone didn't get a letter. We were told through Iraq or defense or something saying, look, it should be this. We had to update our processes
Yeah.
as we went.
Yeah, well, my concern is not so much anyway about that, but it's more about the distance or the how. So is 60 meters is that a standard thing that's done by municipalities, or is it governed by, like, how did they come up with 60 meters, I guess, is my.
I would guess staff came up with 60 meters maybe 20 years ago, because we haven't changed it. You mentioned the governance. We follow the Planning Act, and the Planning Act doesn't require us to do any individual, although we do this as an additional step, which I think a lot of municipalities do.
Yeah.
And whether they alter the distance that they actually, and when we looked at it and said, okay, for example, for tonight's was a variance, it's 30 meters.
Yes.
If you look at the things, it's just a slight, I want to say a slight, but how close it is to the side yard, who's that affecting? The people that are most closely to that, which is why that's,
Yep.
and that one's in 30. The rezoning is probably a little bigger to say what the use is going to happen on that property, but again, 60 meters is 200 feet. Who are we looking at that's going to be most affected by a change in that property? But again, it's a number that can be adjusted. It was been that way for 20 or 25 years. Yeah.
I think that's the issue, where the issue that they were having, and I'm not, and I kind of agree with some of the stuff they said, so, because a few years back, it was always put in the Journal, probably, maybe the Journal and the Guardian, but certainly the Journal, I used to see it, for years, but now you get the Journal once a week, and I find that, nothing against the Journal, but a lot of people just don't bother with it once a week.
Yeah.
So I guess we still use the Guardian, and,
I'll let Lynn.
yeah, Facebook maybe, or the internet, or,
So what we're required to do, as Aaron mentioned earlier, under the Planning Act, we're required to put it in the newspaper.
Yep.
And it's a local newspaper, so because the Journal circulation is not regular, we use the Guardian.
right.
And then we also pass that ad on to our HR, and they post it actually on Facebook and do the social media
Yeah.
part. It's kind of outside of us. We just forward the ad on and
Yeah.
let them know that it's done.
Yeah.
So that usually appears on our Facebook page as well. They should have that tomorrow, actually, and that'll go on for that meeting.
So I guess my concern then, and the people I talk to had some concerns, is that may not get the newspaper, certainly not the Journal, and may not get the Guardian, and they may not be on Facebook, and so they were wondering what the chances were if the city, according to them, there was supposed to be some talk before my time that they were looking into maybe changing the 60 meters or expanding it, or so, and it's something I think personally we should take a look at, especially if we're just mailing the stuff out, so no one has to go door to door. So I mean, it's a few more copies obviously have to be made. I assume it's a generic letter.
It's a letter that's, like I said, the mail out list.
Yeah.
The letter gets mailed, and then they input those the names, it's the same letter goes to everyone for consistency. Yeah. We could also, like I say, it was talked about at a couple of different meetings we would have had, whether they're probably on the one that there's no opposition to, there's never any comment on it. But the ones that are controversial, sometimes like, why isn't it bigger? We can show you is what that 60 meter looks like, and what 100, or an 80 meter looks like, and
Yeah.
how many more properties. But some people are still opposed if it's 2 blocks away, so there's a certain, we can show you a map that can
Yeah.
computer generate it, for example, if you wish, and say, we have a couple coming up that are rezoning, and we have this one here. We could go back and say, here's how many would have got notified, what that circle look on the map, And then if that map was 80 meters or 100 meters, here's what it looked like. You're gonna get the next, I'll say, ribbon of people, but you're still not gonna get the people that are 2 blocks away that may still be opposed to that happening in
Yes,
their neighborhood.
I understand.
Yep, so we can do a graphic image to provide you more information, and if you guys wanna consider making a change, you can have it, we was just here to have a discussion what you wanted to look at, and we can give that to you. That helps you provide a more image of what the difference would be.
And we had talked about, it wasn't that long ago, I think it was just last year, we had talked about the ability to maybe enter your email address into a form or something on our website, and then you'll just get it, just like you do power outages. So, I mean, of course, you have to have the internet, but it's just, I think we talked about whoever does that. I think Pauline does the electrical when there's gonna be an outage. Like, and you can send an email, and I'd like to be on this list, and so no matter where you are in the city, you get an email when there's gonna be a planned power outage. I think we could do the same for rezonings and variances and anything that comes in, and you just forward that ad to the Journal, you forward it to HR, and you just put it in this email as well.
For us, we wanna make sure whatever we're doing is repeatable, consistent, so that we're not held for a follow due process until something falls through for a legitimate project and it gets appealed, and that's the grounds that we go beyond what we're required to do, and like I say, as Linda outlined, put the ad in, and that's really all and we do these other steps, and like all the other media sources that we're trying to say, well, like I say, the Journal's not here once a week, and here's the Guardian, some people aren't looking at it, or maybe they're looking at it online, or, so we're trying to limit our requirements, because if we don't do our standard practice all the time, we're gonna, I'll say, lose or delay a development or project, but we still want to provide enough notification to residents.
I just have a quick question for you, Aaron. You said it's the radius that you use from the center point of the
The extreme
subject property?
The extreme boundary.
Extreme boundary.
Like, so it's not necessarily like if you have an
So
odd
it's not a
shaped
perfect
property.
circle.
No, it's basically the closest point of if your property shows up, the point, it jumps out and it comes around every distance. That's why you'll see the graph. If we show you a graph, it's not just a nice circle, it's from even an odd shaped property, the zone.
It is edge to edge.
Yeah. So sometimes even if it just barely ticks somebody's property, they're notified. So it's computer generated to say it's not us just drawing it on there, oh, they're close, or it's barely touching, it's just computer generated, pops out the list.
So maybe with respect to a go forward, Councilor Morrison, would you like to get a recommendation together to consider expanding those notification areas?
Yeah, I think I'd like to, even if it was 90 meters or whatever, well, I could come up with one, I guess,
So for going forward, then probably if maybe staff can report back at the next committee of the whole meeting on April 4th, if that's, I don't know whose mic is on there, if that's a reasonable timeline, to maybe outline what standard best practices are in other municipalities, and then what it would look like to expand that.
Yep.
And then we can look at that then, and then ultimately then we'd have to go through the procedure of making amendments, a variety of amendments that would adjust that if council decides to proceed in that manner. Great.
that'd be perfect. Thanks very much for your explanations and time.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Next item on the agenda is Councillor Gallant bringing forward discussion with respect to age-friendly and seniors advisory stuff. Councillor?
Okay, on February 15th, your worship, myself, and a member of Age Friendly met to kind of go over what kind of happened in the past. And he gave a broad overview, basically, of what went on. So I actually kind of left that meeting kind of baffled because I wasn't really sure where we were going with it. So we're going to have a meeting on the 17th of March, and the committee is going to meet with a group of them to find out where we go from here and what our goals are going to be. They have a pretty broad spectrum, but I don't know if it can be achieved or not. So I'm really looking for clarification, to be perfectly honest.
Just to clarify, Councillor Gallant, you mean age-friendly?
Yep.
Age-friendly Summerside, I'm not exactly sure of the current status of the organization, but brought forward some suggestions and recommendations on how potentially to move forward. We have talked offline on how we go about addressing the needs and opportunities of our older adults and our senior population here in Summerside. One of the discussions we have had is establishing a seniors advisory ad hoc committee to consolidate the work that the city has done to date, feed in the information that was led by a seniors advisory committee by Councillor Snow in the previous council, and to bring together a variety of individuals and organizations within the community who are working on seniors issues. To get a handle on what role we have to play, if any, and how we can go about helping facilitate that going forward to make sure we're looking out for our older adults here in our community. Is that
Basically, yes.
fair summation?
Yeah, yeah.
Again, just a discussion that we sort of had was respect to potentially setting up that ad hoc committee in a couple of months. It'd sort of take direction from you. And obviously the work we'd have to put the terms of reference together for that committee prior to that happening. Then I would suggest maybe coming back here. We can bring forward the terms of reference and we can appoint that committee under your leadership. Any members of council who are interested in participating, obviously perhaps get in touch with Councillor Gallant and look at involving members of the public to do that as well. So I think the overall message is let's get a handle on all the things that are out there and what the needs are so that we can address them as best possible in a clear, cohesive way.
Yep. I'd like it to be like one specific area, not all over the map, one specific area. Yep.
Great. Any other comments to add to that? Okay, Councillor. Would take direction from you with respect to when you want to establish that committee, and then you let me know, and then I will send out a message to council and see who wants to be on it, and then I will put that committee in place.
Well, we do have a meeting scheduled for the 17th of March. Yep.
Okay, so we'll want to wait till that happens and then feedback. Okay, great. Sounds good. We will move along to item F. This is ongoing nuisance, criminal and illegal drug activity. Councillor Adams. Before I hand it over to you, Councillor, I just want to take, I know we've spoken about it, but just to an extra note of caution with respect to everyone at council, when we are talking about policing matters or matters, essentially make sure that if you are saying anything with respect to any individuals, locations, activity, that those are kept, that you are referring to things that are in the public domain. You do not want to find yourself in a situation, whether by mistake you say something that isn't necessarily correct when you're dealing with sensitive matters like this. So I just remind everyone to be cautious.
Thank you, Your Worship.
It's mostly for Gordon, so he doesn't have to deal with the potential headaches.
So on behalf of residents in my ward, I've been asked to bring forward an issue that has gone on for some time now. Residents asked if they should all come this evening. I thought maybe it might be better to wait until we see what we might want to do moving forward as a city and have them maybe participate in it with their experiences. And just going forward, I realize that what I'm going to speak about is not specific to the area I live in or I represent. There are several instances in the city, and people from all over have reached out with their stories, so it's not, this individual issue is from my ward, but it's not something that hasn't been experienced through all of them. So it is an issue regarding ongoing nuisance, criminal activity, and illegal drug activity. And as the mayor mentioned, I am not about to speak on anything that can't be backed up that has been mentioned in public by either the RCMP or the Summerside Police. And there's no speculation or assumption in anything I'm about to say. I'm aware residents have written to Mayor, CAO, Police Services, and our local MLA expressing their own experiences and fears on this matter. Residents have appreciated the fact that time has been taken to reply to all the emails and their calls. But they just feel we're maybe at a point where replying is not enough, and they want to help the city take any action that can be taken moving forward. So for months now, residents in a family-oriented, senior-friendly subdivision in our city have been plagued with the comings and goings of people purchasing illegal drugs from a single-family dwelling. The dwelling is privately owned. Multiple people have been moved into the house since the fall. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, taxis run buyers to this house to purchase illegal drugs. Taxis circle around the subdivision or wait at a cul-de-sac in another area of the subdivision until the deal is done or the drugs are consumed, and then they return for their fare. Please note that up until a drug bust on February 10th, taxis were waiting in the driveway while their fare purchased or used drugs at the dwelling. After the bust, taxis have become much more mindful of how long they wait around the property. Residents have called to report the taxi companies supporting this criminal activity. Residents have also called to report the speed at which the taxis drive in the area. Residents have called the police, and they have called the individual taxi companies. This is an area with a previously well-used park, and it's to be noted there are no sidewalks for pedestrians when they're out walking and so on. So a question from the residents is, how are taxis licensed by our city and police force permitted to take users to a house to purchase illegal drugs from a known dealer? On February 10th, residents were nervous and at the same time relieved when it appeared there was finally some police activity at the house as multiple police vehicles descended on the property. Prince District Joint Forces issued a search warrant and seized cocaine, crystal meth, money, and an unsecured shotgun, in addition to other drug trafficking paraphernalia. An individual living in the house, not the owner of the house, was charged with possession for purpose of trafficking and several weapons offenses. This person is due back in Summerside Court tomorrow. Question from the residents: will Summerside Police bring forward a proposal for safer communities and neighborhoods legislation to the province? This legislation improves community safety by targeting and, if necessary, shutting down commercial buildings, residential and commercial buildings and land that are regularly used for illegal activities. This will give the authority for power and action to be taken. This is a legislation that is active in most provinces in Canada, and it is something that has been mentioned several times by myself, by members of our own police force and by members of the RCMP. And just quickly, I went on and I found Nova Scotia's, and it's just, this is their ad. I have their legislation here as well. And it's a quick go-to on it. So if anybody's wanting to know what it is, exactly the safer communities and neighborhoods is, that's just a quick go-to. So on February 26th, police received a 911 call indicating that a man was breaking into vehicles in this area. The man was arrested, kept in jail overnight, and the following morning was issued a ticket for being intoxicated in a public place and a future court date for a charge of theft under $5,000. While, as I mentioned, this is not an issue that is new to the city, it is an issue that is very uncommon to this particular area. Residents are wondering what can police do to assist residents in the area to feel safe again in their own homes and on their properties. Residents also wanted to note that in the past few weeks, the police presence has been consistent and ongoing in the area where this property is located. Upon review of the City of Summerside nuisance bylaw, the property owner currently has a minimum of 3 violations. Residents are wondering why are city bylaws activated for long grass and unsightly properties, but they are not being activated for nuisances that are impacting the day-to-day life and mental well-being of a neighborhood. The province has been called in regard to inspecting the property at the house due to the furnace oil being spilled all over the exterior of the house and on the ground. Oil can be smelled from the adjoining properties. The residents want to know if the city will enlist the help of any provincial departments necessary that could help with ensuring the neighborhood is once again resident-friendly. Just a few quick things that has happened that people wanted to pass on their experiences was strangers to the neighborhood have entered a home thinking it was the house where drugs could be purchased. They did not knock, they did not introduce themselves. They came right in and up the stairs looking for the dealer. They were soon advised they were not in the right house. But this happened during the day. Given the time of day, it probably ended as good as it could have. Had this been in the middle of the night, it could have been a very different story. Strangers to the neighborhood have been going door to door randomly knocking. When the door is not answered, they move on to the next house. It is unclear what they want, as no one in the subdivision is answering the door to someone they do not know. And it should be noted that this was a very open door policy neighborhood. Strangers to the neighborhood have approached people in their yards using the name of the person arrested for trafficking and asking where they can find the house that he lives in. I had an email from a 12-year-old girl, and she said, it was titled Neighborhood Safety, and she said, I have a complaint. You might be thinking, what could a 12-year-old girl have anything to complain about? Well, there are 4 men that live down the street from me. The men are not just ordinary people. They are involved in drugs. As you know, drugs are very powerful and can change people. The men could be nice people, but they can do something without thinking because of the substances they are on. It's scary to think they could do anything because of drugs. I've heard stories about these men and seen the police going around our neighborhood because of them. I've even seen a few of the men roaming around our neighborhood, not knowing what they're doing and can barely walk. Knowing what they are capable of because of substances makes me feel unsafe in my bed at night. It's getting to the extent where some nights I go up and sleep with my dad. I'm a 12-year-old girl and I should want to be in my room feeling safe and cozy, but lately I don't. My neighborhood has many kids and some are young enough that they shouldn't know the difference between safe people and not so safe people. My neighborhood has always been a place where people want to live, and there are so many kids for other kids to play with. But something like this could ruin its reputation. I think this is serious for kids and mine and everyone else's safety in our neighborhood. Please take my letter into consideration. So, in moving forward, I would really like us to seriously have a sit down with our Summerside Police and look at pursuing the Safer Communities and Neighborhood proposal legislation for the province.
Thanks, Councillor Adams. I agree 110%. So I would say approximately 4 years ago, I brought this very thing to council, Safer Communities and Neighborhoods. It's also in New Brunswick. I know Councillor Mitchell Tweel in Charlottetown was bringing it forward, lobbying the provincial government. It seemed to have lost its traction over the years, but as somebody who had a family member affected by drugs over the years and still feeling the ripple effects from that, I'm willing to do whatever possible to make our city safer. When you're receiving letters from 12-year-old girls about wanting their neighborhood to be safe, that really pulls on the heartstring. But beyond that, we just really need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure our neighborhoods are safe. So whatever you're needing from this councillor, and I'm sure all councillors in here are willing to do whatever they can, because it is a serious issue. We're not the only city in it, but there's other cities dealing with it, and we should look at all options.
And I think the thing too was that our members and our CMP members are saying they need this.
Yeah.
So if they're saying they need it, if they're saying it's a valuable tool to help them, and we can help them get it, then to me, that's like, you know, we go through our budget and we make sure they have all the proper equipment they need. But this is a huge tool that they could use.
Yes, great presentation, Councillor Adams, and I agree that something has to be done, and I would support sitting down with their police force and moving this project forward. Thanks.
Any other comments from council? Councillor Adams, I echo Councillor MacDougall's comments there. Important presentation here today, and I know across the city it's a bit of a whack-a-mole process, unfortunately. And there are certainly a whole bunch of different layers to this, from the drugs of today are different than the drugs of the past. We are dealing with lack of facilities for addiction services support and those wraparound services. But as well, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to give our police force the tools that they need to help make all our communities here in Summerside safe. So I certainly would be supportive of putting together at least an initial letter of request with respect to the Safer Communities legislation, and requesting a meeting. Now, you know, we've got a provincial election on with whoever the Minister of Justice is after April the 3rd as an urgent matter here in our community. It also may be helpful for council, and I'll put this out here, if we wanted to have our chief of police come and discuss what the strategies and tools we're using or employing here now in our community, and perhaps some feedback from staff with respect to, you know, are things like nuisance bylaw, is that at play here? Is that a tool? And if there are concerns with respect to taxi service, and you know, we do license taxis here in Summerside. Is that something as well we can be looking at, sort of a full picture? So perhaps we can look at that for a subsequent meeting to get Chief in. If it is with respect to specific policing matters and tactics, would obviously have to have a discussion as to what components are in camera and are not, because obviously policing strategies are something that I want to make sure are that the police know and that the bad guys don't, I guess would be the simple way to put it. And I know this for Meadowview, for your area there, Councillor Adams. You know, I've knocked on every door in the city. There are not a lot of cameras. There are not a lot of doorbells with cameras there yet. There are certainly other neighborhoods now that there are every step of the way, and you hear about it and the reasons why, and it's something we need to make sure. One of the fundamental pieces here for our city is that we're taking care of our citizens and making sure that they are safe and that they feel safe. So if to suggest that we maybe put that request in, one, to draft a letter, and two, to have a follow-up report in from police services. Is that satisfactory for you? Council okay with that? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Councillor Adams. We're moving on to item G, dog owners cleaning up after their pets. Councillor MacDougall, how do you really feel?
Really, as we could see in the previous presentation, I think there's a lot more things to talk about than doggy do. So let's talk about the dog owners, because I just finished a couple of weeks with the Canada Games, and I was out to all the venues every night here in Summerside. And the one comment that we got from a lot of people was the facilities we have in this city. You know, whether it's the Cup, the Dome, even the Silver Fox was done up great, and everything was ran like clockwork. And, you know, one of the things that they didn't see was our beautiful boardwalk. And we have one of the nicest ones around, and probably one of the longest ones, and it's great, and I use it every day. And every morning, without, fail, there's always somebody that'll come up to you and say, what are you going to do about people not picking up after the dogs? And, you know, so it's an issue, and I don't know what we can do about it. I know it's probably worse in the winter time, but we need to put on an awareness campaign or something, because it's disgraceful. 99% of the people down there, they walk with their dogs. They have their dogs tied up. You know, 99% of the people are doing it right. That's 1 or 2% that's causing it, a lot of the people to be, ticked off, and it's disgusting. So I just wanted to put that out there, and hopefully the city can come up with an awareness campaign or something. People just need to clean up after their dog. So, thank you.
I just want to add to that. I walk that boardwalk every day myself. So right at the beginning of the boardwalk, before you actually go to the boardwalk, there's 2 cans on both sides that hold baggies. I went to the dollar store and bought baggies to put in there so that people that don't have their baggies can grab a bag and take it with them on their walk. So there should be no excuse why they don't pick up after their animals.
The very unfortunate thing is that maybe the people that need to hear that, they're not going to hear it. So the awareness is, it has to be like almost like a on-foot patrol. And as you say, Councillor Bruce, for the 98% people that are responsible citizens, it's usually the 2% that could care less.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I remember a number of years ago, even medical people would say, like, there's a lot of germs, little in the summer, young children playing or whatever, like it can be picked up and there's germs, there's disease, whatnot.
Yeah.
So then it becomes like a community health
Yeah.
concern for people. So I agree with you, and I wish and hope that there's something that we can do as a community.
Yeah, and it's frustrating, and I put it on here tonight because I'm asked so many times what we're going to do about it, and how come we don't have cameras? But then again, what are you going to do with the camera? So.
Excuse me, but then again, we run into situations around, like, some people feel that cameras, it's an invasion of privacy. So I think we've had that discussion a number of times.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe it's foot patrol, but be careful where you step.
Councillor, do you want to leave it at that, or do you want to look to bring forward recommendations? And,
Well, no,
consideration
I
for-
don't need to bring forward a recommendation. I spoke to our CAO this morning, and I think staff would be able to come up with some kind of awareness program to start it, and I'm comfortable if the CAO is comfortable with that. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Bruce, on that note, I think last year we put out new signage along the boardwalk. We've already done a few things
lot.
in regards to notifying the public to pick up after their dogs.
Yeah, there is, yeah. And-
I wonder if there's not, I don't know, is there anybody, I mean, we're not the only community dealing with this either, like, people don't pick up after their dogs. The people that don't do it aren't gonna do it, but there has to be some sort of mechanism to look after it. I'm thinking of a bylaw officer, but I don't know how many times I have to say that word, but.
He's gotta get up early.
I just think there's lots of things we can be doing in our city that will tackle some of these one-off positions or one-off issues that would fall under that, but, yeah, I just want to know, let it known that we have done it in the past, social media posts and put up some new signage along the boardwalk and stuff regarding it.
Yeah, it's an annual issue that we deal with. You will see a new kind of awareness campaign going out, actually starting this evening, and it'll run over the next number of weeks. I'm a big believer that the messaging has to be, for lack of better words, in your face and catch people's attention. As we go through the spring cleanup, everything that's there now and not, will get cleaned up, and then as we kind of get into the warmer months, we do have staff in the area basically on an annual basis that are I won't say patrolling, but certainly trying to educate if they notice anyone not cleaning up after their pet, and B, just in the area helping to maintain the whole area. So it is an ongoing issue. There's no real silver bullets, but we do try to keep the bag areas stocked. Sometimes we have found in the past you stock it in the morning and someone comes and takes them out in the afternoon. It's kind of silly, but anyway, it is an issue that staff are paying attention to.
And I don't think, in terms of awareness, certainly there can't be a dog owner here that knows you're not supposed to do that. Like, you can have a sign every 4 feet on the boardwalk, and they're not gonna, the ones that let it happen, they don't care about the signs. You could educate, but you're not gonna educate the people that, they know better anyway.
Thank you, Councillor and Councillors. We will move into item H, which is good here. That's under me. That's transit update. Just wanted to update council on some ongoing discussions and get any feedback as necessary. As a number of you probably know, the previous council commissioned a transit feasibility study for the city of Summerside with Dillon Consulting 2 years ago, probably, year and a half, something like that. That was the direction of the previous council, was to look into, explore whether or not transit was a feasible option here for the city of Summerside. Clearly for the, what I will say are obvious reasons, but I think I'll restate some of them with respect to obviously reducing our impact on our climate, with respect to reducing emissions. The single biggest source of emissions in Prince Edward Island is transportation. Giving opportunities for all ages, 8 to 80 really, to be able to get around our community in ways that work for them and in ways that are affordable for them, and to be able to sort of support our community in a variety of ways. More recently, we're made aware of a federal initiative, the Rural Transit Fund, made aware of that through Federation of Canadian Municipalities. The Rural Transit Fund, of which we are eligible to apply, sets an objective to create, to provide capital, to provide dollars for capital infrastructure for transit, the building of transit systems. That is consistent with the transit feasibility study that the previous council undertook. It is task. It is a rather generous federal fund. The federal government obviously is trying to promote and increase the use of transit across the country. It provides up to 80% of capital costs, which is stackable as well, as I understand. So discussions have been ongoing. We are looking at moving forward with an application. That does not in any way mean we are doing this or not doing this. The application is, we're considering putting an application together, putting it forward, identifying whether or not we would secure funding, and then we really have to put it through a serious stress test, both with respect to the capital and then the operating piece, because certainly we would require some operating support from the provincial government, and understand what that would mean to our bottom line and what that would mean to our community. So I wanted to just update council on that, and if any councillors are interested in being part of that discussion in the interim, to let me know. If there's anything you want to say here, certainly ask any questions. This is the This is kind of the goal of having this committee of the whole process, so we can have just an open discussion and make sure we're all still on the same page. Okay, great. That was easy. Moving into the last one, I did say when we amended the agenda, item J, but that would be the adjournment, but that, we're gonna have two J's. So J1 is the community fridge update. So we have a working group of councillors, Gallant, MacDougall, and Adams, if I believe, to report back, you were given direction to report back at this committee meeting. So I'm just looking for an update.
Yeah, I can quickly update and then you guys can chime in with anything I'm missing. So a couple weeks ago, we met with Jolene, who has started the community fridge. It was a great discussion. We got back to the original idea and how it all came about and where she got the idea from and what she's seen other communities doing and so on. So we decided at that meeting, in the councillors, CAO, and in cooperation with Jolene, that it was best to wait to make any further decisions on location, etc., until she had the board of directors in place. And at that time, it was pretty much, there were some that were definitely on, there were some that were just waiting. She was waiting, a couple that were waiting on the commitment. I think there's 8 in total, I think so. And they are all people that are involved in different charities, different organizations, or in the social work field in the city. So it was a nice variety of expertise for sure. So yeah, it was decided that it was best to wait until they had the board of directors. Then the board of directors will come back and meet with the working group for council, and then all of us together would decide where the fridge is best located, and about if there should be hours of operation or if it should be staffed and so on. So we don't want to go out and make the rules for them. We want them to bring it to us, and we want to go through it all together. Of course, we'll have suggestions on things we've heard and what might and might not work, but yeah, we felt that was probably the best way, and that Jolene, and she had just checked in with us last week, making sure like where we were at, and we said, no, we're still good. We're just, whenever you're ready with your board of directors, we're willing to meet. So did I miss anything, guys?
No, just that our initial meeting, we made it very plain that the success of the community fridge would depend on the formation of a board, and they agreed, and yeah.
And the not-for-profit.
And not-for-profit,
I
yeah.
messed that up.
Yeah, not-for-profit board. So they were fully in agreement with that. They were going to get their board together and come back to us with a meeting, as Councillor Adams has said.
I don't want to add to that. I noticed actually yesterday in the paper, Alberton has a community fridge.
Mm-hmm.
They now have hours of operation because they were basically going through the same situation that we were going through.
Yeah.
So they have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 8 till 4, Friday, Saturday from 8 till 12, and then there's nothing on Sunday.
Right.
So I kind of just wanted to add that on there.
I'm just wondering if they had a time frame where they were getting their board, like, do they have any, like, are we expecting this to take 2 months, a month, weeks, or?
We really told them as soon as they can do it, we'd be willing to meet as soon as possible. Like, I think it's not something that we wanted to drag out, so we told her as soon as you guys, it's not that we're waiting for their not-for-profit status, as long as we know their board of directors is in place and they're working on the application for the status, then we're good to go. We're not going to wait, because we know that, and especially now, that things will maybe be a little bit backlogged for things like that, so.
Okay, perfect, thank
Yeah.
you.
And, yeah, I was gonna reach out to Jolene today to see how they were getting along, but I was on Zoom calls all day, so we can reach out to Jolene tomorrow and see how they're coming along with the board, and we'll let council know. Thanks.
Gordon, did you have anything? No, pretty much. Okay.
Great, thank you, councilors. So we'll just put a note on for our April 4th committee meeting, just update there, just so we have a standing item there. Brian, if you can just make sure that's on the agenda for that date. We will now move, we have one item, which is item I1 here. Update, this is an in-camera item, and this is with respect to the Rapid Housing Initiative. So this is, anyway, we have to move to an in-camera session for that. Is that correct? Yes. So unfortunately, we have to ask public and media to leave and turn off our YouTube channels. Apologies, but do you want to take 5 minutes, or you want to just get it done?
Well, should take 5 minutes in case there's any questions from media.
Sure. Oh, yeah, we can take, yeah, we can take a couple of minutes. Sure, no problem with that.